In the wake of World War I, there was a significant movement in horror emerging from Germany. If we're being technical, the horror genre didn't even exist at that time. German Expressionism was an art movement that was very avant-garde. The shadows were exaggerated, and the sets were very stylized. This created a very peculiar type of atmosphere. A boogeyman type of character always seemed to be present in some way, shape, or form. In the 1920s, American cinema saw a surge in creature features. These were filmed very straightforward. America was great at makeup when it came to the actors, but the lighting and sets were lackluster. Most early horror films in America lacked that eerie feeling. It wasn't until the early 1930s that American horror really took off. German filmmakers had begun immigrating to the States in the mid to late 1920s, but I want to focus on Karl Freund. Before moving to the States in 1929, Freund had done the cinematography for Central German films. These films include The Golem, The Last Laugh, and Metropolis. One of the first American films that Freund worked on was Dracula. Dracula came out in 1931 and was directed by Todd Browning, but Freund is known as the uncredited director for the film. With Freund's art direction, and literal direction, Dracula became known as the horror film that started it all in America. Dracula is based on the stage play by Hamilton Dean and John L. Balderston. The 1924 stage play was the first authorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. Notice that I said first authorized? That's because 2 years before the stage play and 9 years before the film had come out, another adaptation was filmed. However, this adaptation was made without permission from Stoker's estate. Nosferatu, a symphony of horror, is known as one of the greatest horror films of all time. In Nosferatu, a man and his wife live in a small village. The man is sent to Transylvania to meet Count Orlok, as Orlok wants to purchase some real estate from him. Once Orlok is in the picture, a plague breaks out and he must protect his wife and village from the vampire. This is actually very close to the source material, even though it was an unauthorized adaptation and names and the setting and a lot of things are changed. Nosferatu is actually the most faithful to the source material. Florence Balcombe, who is Bram Stoker's widow, wasn't pleased with Murnau's Nosferatu. She was struggling with money. As the executor of Stoker's work, she wasn't asked permission for the film to be made. She took legal action, expecting money and the prints of the film to be destroyed. She won. However, one print wasn't destroyed. That print ended up in the United States in 1929, and more prints were made from this one singular print. While there are obviously similarities between the films, they couldn't be more different. Remember earlier how I said German Expressionism relied on boogeymen? Count Orlok in Nosferatu is the epitome of a boogeyman. On the other hand, Count Dracula in Dracula is quite the opposite. Bela Lugosi is handsome, and they do not shy away from making that part of Count Dracula's appeal. Dracula doesn't focus on just one protagonist, whereas Nosferatu does. Nosferatu's set pieces are much more ambitious. Count Orlok doesn't turn people into vampires, unlike Count Dracula. We all know that vampires have one common enemy, the sun. Even how the vampires react to the sun is different. As discussed earlier, the way horror was filmed in both Germany and the United States were very different. Karl-Heinz Martin directed From Morn to Midnight, which came out in 1920. At its core, it's a German film about capitalism. Every set piece in this film feels so outlandishly fake, and that's part of its charm. One of my favorite scenes from the German Expressionism movement is from The Golem. This film is about a sorcerer bringing a clay golem to life to save the Jewish community from persecution. The movie is actually part of a trilogy, but it's the only film of the three that's not lost. The two scenes I just discussed really encapsulate German Expressionism to me. Toward the beginning of the video, I mentioned American horror really relying on makeup. The Phantom of the Opera is a prime example of that. The United States really started to find its footing with The Fall of the House of Usher, which is a short film based on Edgar Allan Poe's work. The experimentation in this film is next level, especially when compared to prior filming techniques used in the country. It was only a few years later that Dracula would come out and kickstart the entire horror genre as we know it. Horror wouldn't be what it is without German Expressionism. The movement still influences films to this day. Some of my favorite films probably wouldn't exist if Germany didn't make the films that they did in the 1920s. Thanks, German Expressionism.